Back with no frostbite from last week's game against Colorado State is Brent Briggeman. He persevered the cold, made the trip up to Fort Collins. Obviously, you were in an air-conditioned press box, so not that bad for you, but a nasty game for those players. Falcons win that one, though, win pretty handily. It kind of looked like just another Air Force game after some trouble early on. What were your takeaways?
Well, I wouldn't say they won it handily or easily. It was 13-13
Sure.
at halftime. And as we've seen really all season long, especially lately, Air Force dominated the second half. They got the ball out of halftime, which is always their plan. CSU did them a favor by actually taking the ball after winning the toss. So that goes right into Air Force's script of getting the ball first. They get it. They get the added 15 yards on a unsportsmanlike penalty for the CSU bench for their fans throwing snowballs on the field, which was an ongoing thing through the game until that point. That really finally cleaned it up. And obviously some CSU people had some words to say about that. I thought it was perfectly justified.
Yeah.
They were warned thoroughly, continued to do it. And, I don't think anyone's going to be seriously injured, but you can't have projectiles of any kind being repeatedly thrown from the crowd. So anyway, that was on the opening drive of the second half. Air Force goes down and scores, gets a defensive stop, and then, outscores them 17-0 in the second half. In their last, I think, 5 games, they've outscored their opponents 100-12 in the second half. So it's one of those things where they're just wearing teams down and they're adjusting to what teams are doing, not just scheme-wise, but, just kind of seeing, okay, this is what you're presenting from a physical standpoint. Now this is how we're going to respond to it. And it's been extremely effective. So that was, I had said beforehand, that was an important game for Air Force. It was at a team that knows them well, has a lot of talent, can beat a lot of teams. They beat Boise State. They can beat anybody on a given day like that. And then you have the weird conditions. And again, playing in their stadium where they had never beaten Air Force, still haven't now. I think it was a really dangerous situation. Air Force walked out of it very cleanly.
Yeah, no, definitely. Something I want to ask, not necessarily X's and O's related, but Air Force, after some touchdowns, they throw that spirit cheese.
Yeah.
Do you think that could create a similar situation?
Yes. Well, they have been warned about it. And actually this week they distributed information to their fans and then to the media, just basically saying, cut that out. We've seen now that the Mountain West will penalize teams. We as Air Force don't want to be penalized. So leave your cheese at home or in your pocket, or at the very least wait till after the game when no penalties can be enforced. So yeah, it is a weird situation.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's part of college football. You have fan bases that are energized and have their quirks, but yeah, no, apparently we won't see any cheese in Denver this week.
Well, Brent, something I noticed watching that game is Torrey Horton, he got hurt third quarter, their star receiver at CSU, and their offense just didn't move the same without him. I don't know if you thought that was a huge loss for them, or that was more just second half Air Force that we've seen week in and week out.
I think it was a little bit of both. The condition in the second half had gotten pretty bad. I mean, nobody said the ball was wet and the wind wasn't blowing, but it was just so persistently cold. It was going to be hard to win that game through the air. But yeah, anytime you take away a talent like that. But he was on there in the first half, and they scored one touchdown, and it wasn't to him. It was to Justice Ross Simmons on a deep ball. That was their only score. Was a 61-yard or whatever pass. So Air Force was just a lot better defensively than CSU was offensively, and I think the conditions did exacerbate that difference a little bit.
Sure. And this week, another big game for the Falcons, not in terms of conference, but in terms of Commander-in-Chief trophy. Falcons play against Army at Empower Field at Mile High. Should be a really fun game. Army, not necessarily the best team, but those games always find a way to seem close, it seems like.
Yeah, we talked about this with the Navy matchup. There was one year Air Force was something like 11-2, 10-3, and they needed a blocked punt to beat Navy. I think that was their only touchdown of the game. So in these games, I hate saying the whole cliche, throw out the records, but you really can. But you can also look at Army. They've had the last week's loss to UMass was terrible. By any definition, that was terrible. But they did go to UTSA and win that game. They were up 37-20, I believe, at one point. And that, you look at like the Sagarin computer rankings, that kind of levels the playing field, shows everybody. I think UTSA is 60. Air Force's best win was by that ranking, at San Jose State. San Jose State's ranked 70th. So that's a better win than Air Force has all season.
Right.
Then they played Syracuse tight up at the Carrier Dome, and then
Boston College, I think, was close.
Played Boston College pretty close. They got waxed by LSU, of course, but that's LSU.
Figures,
so they have seen a lot more talent than Air Force has seen. And yes, the record is down. The UMass game, again, that was maybe an after effect of LSU. I don't know. Or maybe they've just packed it in for the season. So many ways you can look at that. I just think that they're not going to they're going to give their best effort for Air Force.
Right.
And so if their best effort that we've seen is good enough to beat UTSA on the road, then it's a team that can certainly challenge Air Force when it's at its best.
And you also have to look at that this Army team, what do they have, like 6 losses at this point? Like, it's very unlikely these guys make a bowl game. So this is more or less their bowl game. We need to, I mean, obviously the Navy game too to wrap up the season. But this is one of their biggest games marked every year for them. That elevates it, even if their record, okay, we're probably not going to a bowl game. This is kind of a bowl game for us.
Absolutely. And they've had that taste. They've won the Commander-in-Chief's trophies several times in the past 5-6 years after going a long time without it.
Right.
So they've done it. They've been there. And yeah, I believe they are technically out of a bowl game because at least it used to be if they had 6 losses.
Oh, to
because
FCS?
because they play Navy so late, that's kind of their agreement was if we are not bowl eligible before then, because bowls are decided before that Navy game is played.
Got it.
So they, because then they wouldn't be able to get at 5 and 7 if they were to lose to Navy.
Right.
So I think, at least the way it used to be in the past, they're already out of the bowl.
Oh,
race.
interesting.
But yes, I mean, it wouldn't matter if they were 0 and 8. When they're playing Air Force, they desperately want to win. They can get, it just adds stakes to that Navy game too for them. Not that you need to add many stakes, but because then they could win the trophy in that game. So Army and Jeff Monken clearly has there's a fun rivalry there between Monken and Calhoun and the programs and the history and everything about it. They don't want to go to Denver and lose to Air Force.
No, for sure. And Brent, before we go, I want to talk a little bit about Air Force's position on the national scale. Falcons are 8-0. The first playoff rankings came out yesterday, and Air Force is 25th compared to, 17 in the AP poll?
Yeah, 17 in both polls, 25th in the college football playoff, which, wouldn't matter, except the giant caveat is that Tulane came in at 24.
Right.
And so the way the whole thing works is the college football playoff slots of top 4. That's their primary job. But then they also rank everybody else, and the top-ranked team from a group of 5 conference, so not one of the Power Fives, gets that automatic bid into a New Year's 6 bowl game, which comes with a ton of money for the conference and for the team itself. So right now, Air Force is on the outside of that looking in. Now, the conference, the committee, they cited strength of schedule, specifically noting that even though Tulane has 1 loss, which they kind of wrote off. That was
Ole Miss, right?
Ole Miss, and their quarterback was hurt for that game, and they took that into consideration apparently. So they have 1 loss, Air Force unbeaten, but their top win was against Memphis, which I believe by those Sagarin rankings was somewhere in the 50s, maybe, mid-50s. So not a massive win,
right?
But when they looked at Air Force's resume, they cited Wyoming as Air Force's best win, and that was at home by 7 points. And Wyoming's they're ranked 83rd nationally.
Oh wow!
So again, that's all by 1 computer ranking. There's a million computer rankings. This is just the one I choose just to keep things simple. So at this point, Memphis I think they really looked at who's the best win, and Tulane had the better win in their opinion than Air Force. Now, Air Force still plays. The next 2 weeks are not going to help themselves. They're going to play Army, and then they're going to play Hawaii. All they could do would, in terms of the committee's eyes, probably is lose and then fall out. But they can't really climb based on those wins. But then they'll play UNLV, which at this point is looking like a really strong team. Then they go to Boise State in the finale. If they're still unbeaten, so this is all still relevant, they would play likely Fresno State, Boise State, Wyoming, UNLV. One of those 4. Again in the championship game. Now, Tulane has a similar situation. They don't play any marquee teams from here on out, but they would then have a conference championship game as well. So it would just really come down to how those teams fare. So, it's going to be interesting. Fresno State and Boise State play. So the winner of that will elevate themselves in the rankings a little bit. And so then by Air Force beating them, which again is the only way this matters, is, that is going to give Air Force a good win. So we'll see, but I certainly went into last night assuming Air Force was in the driver's seat in those polls the way they are in the rankings, and that was not the case. So I'm sure it's a lot of disappointment for Air Force fans or maybe it adds some excitement. I don't know, because the season doesn't end today, and of course Air Force players all talk about none of this matters. We have to go 1-0 this week, and that's the right mentality. but it's okay for the.
It does matter, though.
It does matter, and those of us who can step back and look big picture know that it would be crushing if Air Force were to go 13-0 and then play, in the LA Bowl, instead of this. And some of it does fall on the scheduling philosophy of Air Force. But you can't really follow them. Everybody seemingly plays an FCS game, so the fact that Air Force opens with one every single year, that's just it is what it is. But it's not unique to them. And then this year they were supposed to play New Mexico State at the beginning of a home and home with them. New Mexico State joined the WAC, and so they had to shed some games. That's why they got rid of the Air Force game, and then Air Force then scheduled Sam Houston. So if you look at that, Sam Houston, again, using those same rankings, which is winless at this point, is ranked 164th. New Mexico State is 116th. So you dropped quite a bit because New Mexico State canceled on them.
Right.
And but I think the way the committee looked at it was so much more what was your best win versus what was the collective of your schedule. So I don't really know that they lost anything in
Probably
that.
Not, no.
The other alternative would be a scheduling philosophy that says we're going to take nothing but bye games, and we're going to play a Michigan State, somebody like that Air Force has, and you go on the road and you get your paycheck and you usually get a loss.
Yeah.
Air Force hasn't done that very often. They do it on occasion. And then the other alternative is to talk a team into playing a home and home. And to Air Force's credit, they've done that in the future with Arizona and with Baylor. So those are teams that will come to Falcon Stadium. It's just really hard to get a Power 5 type to come to your stadium. I don't know how much they've explored, the Memphises of the world to do that. But, you're not going to get Baylor, TCU, someone like that to do this all the time. So, if anybody's angry about Air Force's scheduling philosophy, I think you have to look at it and say, well, what more can they really do?
Kind of makes sense, yeah.
So I really don't fault that. And I do, I tend to believe that if they do run the table in the Mountain West, I don't think an undefeated Mountain West champion is going to be left out of a group of 5 when there's not another undefeated alternative. Because Tulane does have a loss, Ole Miss or not. And, it could very well happen that somebody stumbles, either Air Force or Tulane. Yeah. So a lot to be determined, but it was a disappointing starting point for Air Force.
A lot of football left to be played. 4 games in the regular season left for the Falcons. Should be an interesting stretch. Brent will have a lot of coverage. I'll have some too, so make sure you're staying tuned.